Alright everyone, so we're back for another week. Now, first off, before we start, no, I'm not wearing Clearfield colors. I know we're the Golden Tide, gold and black. This is a hoodie from my old high school when I coached tennis there, so Southmoreland, red and black, Scotties, there we go. Secondly, this is a special week for this video because this coming weekend is the start of 2 state holidays, whether you realize it or not. The state holidays that are happening this coming Saturday, that would be May 2nd. First off, I know a lot of you were talking about this in my classes earlier this year. First day of spring gobbler. The second state holiday that is also happening the same day is the first day of the walleye opener, which is actually why I'm filming this at about 10:30 at night, because I just got into my shop from collecting night crawlers from my yard, so I am all set and ready to go for next Saturday. Moving on. Today's project that we're going to be working on in the shop has to do with one of these 2 holidays, and that would be the start of spring turkey season. Now, one thing that a lot of you have always asked when we have some spare time in shop: can we make turkey calls in shop? And I always tell you absolutely. The laser I have set up in the shop, we've punched out a ton of turkey calls, and unfortunately all those parts are sitting at school waiting for you guys to put them together who actually had started them. Other ones that we've done, some people have made friction calls in the shop. My channel, Spruce Hollow Woodworks, I started out kind of as a little bit of side business, Spruce Hollow game calls. Mostly, over the years, I've made what we'd call pot calls or friction calls. Wood, a lot of times with slate. This one has a piece of crystal in it. This one actually has a piece of copper plate. It's actually an old copper pipe that was sawed in half, hammered out flat, and then sandblasted to give it a nice rough surface. If you've had me in the shop, you also know that I've worked with some deer antler before. We do some predator calls out of deer antler. And before I go any further, how I kind of got started doing these turkey calls and coyote calls. At this point, I've actually carved a few box calls out of cedar. A gentleman by the name Dave Dunbar, he used to live in Slippery Rock. He had Critter Buster game calls back when I was in college. He kind of gave me the idea and kind of got me started, gave me some predator reeds. I think a couple of you might have used the last ones I had that he had given me in shop for your coyote calls last year. He has Hoffman lures out of Greenville, Pennsylvania now. Make a great fishing lure. Makes an awesome spoon to use with the fly rod. I've had a lot of fun using those. So Dave, I want to thank you. I actually have something in the mail for you. It's I got your logo, so I threw something together with the old laser at school. So hope you enjoy that. Now, as far as turkey calls go, a lot of people use mouth calls. Box calls are popular. And as far as friction calls go, I'm going to bring up a couple to the camera just to show you basically what we're talking about here. Since a lot of you watching this, you might not hunt, but this is a good lathe project because it kind of gives you some basics. So friction calls can be, a lot of times people think of something like this. It has sound holes in the bottom, slate, crystal, possibly aluminum, copper. This is a really awesome piece of wood. This came from my wife's family's property. It's a piece of Osage orange, real bright yellow color. This is one of the first ones I ever made. It's not the greatest. It was actually made in a drill press, no lathe. That's a square, what we call, I guess, a pot call. It's a friction call. It has copper in the top. And then an oddball one that, I used when I was a kid, probably to drive my parents nuts. My dad gave me one of these. Again, they all make great sound. It's just kind of what you're used to. As far as a lathe project though, a lathe makes things round, or as someone in advanced wood the other year informed me on a test, it circularizes things. Mr. Boer's got one in his made-up word dictionary. Now, obviously, you know, this one that was the trough that I showed you, we're not making that in the lathe, or the rectangular pot call. If you've had me for class, you know one of my favorite woodworking machines is my milling machine over in the metal shop. So that was actually made with the milling machine. Works very well. You know, you can, we'll see if we can, okay? And like I've told you in class before, different surfaces, different sounds, you know, glass, slate, metal, usually higher pitched, louder, slate, a softer sound, a little bit more mellow sounding. I've even seen wood surfaces before that people use. Those would make a very quiet surface. But once we get kind of the sound we're looking for, we can also add a second piece into our calls. So, you know, I have my striking surface there. That's just a piece of slate. But underneath it, if I want a little bit, maybe a extra volume or a little bit more of a second note to my calling, it's kind of hard to see, but I can stack a piece of material underneath that. It's called a soundboard or a tone board to kind of help a lot of times amplify and kind of give it a little bit different sound. So, you know, I have, you know, some different things here. You know, the call made out of Osage. It's actually my wife's. I think I stole that. Laminated call. It's right here. So laminated, glued up. Basically, I did this as an example the other year out of the scrap bin at school. It was stuff that was going to actually get burnt or thrown away. There's some cherry, a little bit of maple, sassafras, walnut, all glued together. And here's actually an example of a piece that I have right there to show you. All different, you know, little maple strips in there, some cherry, walnut. That'll work just fine. I have a couple blanks ready to go. You know, I have some bodies of these calls already cut out. They're actually they're ready for the finishing stage of the process to get these together. So, you know, we start out with a block of wood, something like that. I'll usually go to the bandsaw, rough out a blank, and the goal is then we get to something like this. Those are just rough right now. There's no holes in the bottom for extra sound, but you can see this is a fairly simple, if you've had me for class, lathe process. There's not a ton of shapes to it. It's mostly squaring cuts. Now, you can see in the bottom here, we'll see if we can angle that a little bit. I do have a little bit of dish right here. I like to add those to my calls. The other thing I like to add is I put a little bit of a scallop right in the center, that little indent, kind of cove, to help, helps you grip it a little bit better while you're using it. So different things are going to allow you to, in my opinion, maybe hold it better, or possibly it's just going to be more user-friendly for you. So the project that we're going to work on today, what I have here is a piece of cherry burl that I actually have had in the shop for, oh, I don't know, a couple years. So it's nice and dry now. I cut this out, I think, 2 years ago, and we're just about ready to use this. So first thing I do when I'm getting set, I have this roughly round right now, and we're going to make a call with a 3-inch slate striking surface. So what I need to do, I have my dividers here. We talked last week. I like my layout tools. So, you know, dividers works the same way a compass does, only it's going to scratch the surface instead of draw. I know my slate here is 3 inches, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this up for just slightly larger than 1.5 inches. So we know that 1.5 inches times 2 is going to give us that 3-inch circle when we swing the radius with the dividers. However, I don't want this to be a piston fit or, you know, something I have to force down in there. I do want a little bit of space, because we know we talk about this all the time at school. It's spring, seasonal movement. If I leave that opening too tight for my slate, this wood can actually, warp or expand or contract and possibly break my slate. So I want to give myself a little bit extra when I cut this. I have my center point marked. And I'm just going to bring that around, etch that in there. The other thing I want to do, I like to give myself about 3/16 wall thickness on the outside. So 3/16 on each side, that's an extra 3/8. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to set up with my divider for a 3 3/8 circle. Okay? That way I know exactly where this wall needs to be. So we'll do that real fast. Give myself that. Alright, that's on there. So what I have here, basically I told you I processed this a couple years ago. There's rough saw marks on this. So first things first, I do need to flatten the faces. What I'm going to do to start, and obviously, it would probably been a good idea to wait to do the layout, but I'm kind of trying to do this, help my video along here. So what we're going to do first, I'm actually going to plunge a little bit of a wall for where the slate is going to set, right down in there. Then I'm going to just kind of take my roughing gouge very lightly and just shave off the face, flatten it, flip it around in my jaw chuck, flatten the back. Then I'm good to go with hollowing this out. Alright? So let's head on over to the lathe and we'll see what this process is going to look like. Alright, so I have my lathe set up right now. I have my face mask and my glasses on. I have the piece of cherry in my jaw chuck. I have my tool rest set, a little below center, as close to the workpiece as I can. I spun it just to make sure nothing was touching. Everything looks nice and flush in the jaw chuck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this. I'm going to plunge in right at that line I scribed, and we're going to plunge that little bit of I guess the diameter for my piece of slate to start with. Now it's fairly, it's a fairly small diameter. It's not a large bowl or anything like that. I can increase my speed a bit and work a bit faster. So, I'm in my hoodie. I have my strings tucked. I'm going to pull my sleeves up out of the way. I'm going to make these initial cuts. Alright, what we can see there is I have that depression cut in there where the slate's going to sit. And to be honest, I think we need to make it a little bit deeper because I'm pretty sure I'm going to face that off when I take the gouge to it. So we're going to take another pass. And all I'm using right there is the parting tool because I'm plunging straight in. I'm not trying to add any shape to it because we know that's a recipe for disaster, trying to make a concave cut with the parting tool. So I have that deep enough. I'm going to set my parting tool down, and I could use one of two things right here. I could use my roughing gouge. Could also use my Olin tool that we always use when we're working on bowls. I'm going to stick with the roughing gouge right now. I think it's going to give me the results I want. You can kind of, if you use your ear when anything you're doing in the lathe, you can kind of hear when you've basically gotten any unevenness out. And I couldn't hear any, like a any of that tapping noise, so I was fairly certain that we were good, and it looks fine. All those saw marks are out of it. Now, the last thing I'm going to do before I actually turn this, I'm going to slide this in, and I'm going to just make the little bit that's sticking out from my lathe round. Like, not so much the lathe, but sticking out from the jaw chuck. So, obviously we are working a bit close to the jaw. Spin that, make sure everything's good. It is. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to use the parting tool once again. This time I'm actually going to go more left-handed because of how close to the jaws. I don't want my hand close to the jaws of the lathe. Alright, so right there, I have that roughed down close to the line that we scribed. I want to go back in and keep kind of cleaning up to that line just so I have a good starting spot in this side of my workpiece. Alright, that looks great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set my chisel down real fast. We're going to loosen the jaw. And this jaw chuck is actually the same one we use in school. It's made by Hurricane Tools. Most of the chisels that I have, just like at school, are made by Hurricane. They're fairly affordable and they do a really good job. I have no complaints with what I've been able to do with them so far. So, I have that nice and tight against the jaws of the chuck there. And what I'm going to do is we're going to just face the back off. And then we'll be able to see what's going to happen. I have the back faced, and while I was at it, I also trued up the other side. Now, unfortunately, one of the things that I did leave at school was a little mandrel or holder that I made for holding these, so you can kind of do the whole outer rim all at one time. And you can see right there, I have that little, almost like a fin. I'm not too worried about that right now. That'll clean up later. The important thing is I have the back nice and smooth, nice and flat. We're ready to go true up the front and actually start cutting out the cavity. Now, one last thing. I do need to grab my machinist scale that I always keep on me, and a couple other things. A, the piece of slate, just to check my size. B, my set of outside calipers that I set for my 3 3/8 inches. And my set of inside calipers that are set for just a hair over the 3 inches of that slate. So, what I want to do really fast is measure how thick this is. Now right now this is 13/16. I usually like to have my cauls right around 3/4, if not maybe 11/16. So what we're going to do really fast, I'm actually going to bring my tool rest back in. I'm going to plunge my slate groove just a little bit deeper so I keep my like a sight there, and we're going to take a little bit more off this face to make sure that I get the kind of sound that I want out of this. So we're going to flip my tool rest around. And yeah, you can see I'm actually using a curved or a tool rest more like what we'd use for a bowl in school. Somewhere my smaller tool rest got misplaced for right now, so we're just going to use this. Just a small part of it, perfectly safe. It's just not as convenient to move around. And if you've had me for class, you know, I always say continually check your work, because contrary to what a few people thought the other year, there is no such thing as a wood welder or a board stretcher. So, I'm all good right now. That's just a hair underneath 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to start removing the material in the center so I can check to see how the fitting of that piece of slate is. All right, so I have some material moved, but I have this wall up here cut where I want to try to see how my slate fits, and just right off the bat see if I need to go any wider. And I'm going to say, yeah, I need to go just a little bit larger in diameter. It's just a little bit snug. I don't want to risk this cracking. Okay, that's really good. Probably has between a 64th and a 32nd of an inch of play in that. That's just about perfect. The only thing about it, it does still stick out just a little bit. Not a big deal. I'm nowhere near done with the actual kind of fine tuning of all my cuts on this. So that's actually fairly good for what I want to see for right now in this. Now, the other big thing is obviously getting my center hole drilled in this. I'm actually going to do that on the drill press, or on the, not the drill press, but on my lathe. I'll use the tailstock. We'll put the bit in. What's nice about the jaw chuck here, it is hollow behind this, so I can drill straight through on center. Don't have to worry about hitting anything on my machine. So we're going to get set up for that, and then we'll be back to see that happen. All right, so I'm back. Now, what I like to do is I like to have a 1/2 inch hole in the center of my cauls. It's personal preference. I've seen some that are 3/8, I think. I think I've even seen some that are a lot bigger. All right, so I didn't realize my camera cut out on me. Obviously, I do have the hole drilled. We can see that. I used the tailstock, mounted in. Fairly simple. Now, a couple of things I want to do before I really get into taking this material out of here. I have one of the cauls that I've already have done here. And what I'm going to do, I have a measurement here of that platform. I need to make sure we'll try to hold it there. I need to make sure I don't take that material out of here. So, I do have my measurement, and to be honest with you, I'm not going to use the dividers. The hole's a lot larger than, obviously what the point of the divider will fit into. I'm just going to kind of lay this out. So I have my mark there. All I'm going to do, I'm just going to spin that by hand. That gives me a good start, and then I'm just going to eyeball where I think that should go. And I think that's fairly close. We'll just double check. Not too bad. So, we're going to start by just kind of getting in there and removing this material. And again, I'm going to use my parting tool for a lot of this because it's straight square cuts. There's no I don't have any curvature to the bottom in here.